And this is the thing I really like about your API, to be able to create the fields. So that was the real key thing for me when I was developing this solution, is I looked at like Adobe Sign, and they had all this AI to recognize the fields, but I could never get it to recognize our fields. I also looked at, I think it was HelloSign as well, and they didn't have this functionality either. It was the fact I can make an API call and give the exact XY coordinates, the exact content that I want in those fields, and basically I can control it completely through the API. And that was the key thing for me. I'm the applications developer at the Resero group. So Furnware is one of 3 brands that we have in the Resero group. And the main focus of the group as a whole is the manufacture of school furniture.
Is it exclusively schools, or is schools just your main?
Schools would probably make up 95% of our customers. So we do, we've developed admin ranges for schools that we do to a few offices with desks and other furniture, but our specialty is definitely education.
How big is your company?
I think we're looking at employee count probably of around 250 to 300.
Okay. Yep.
So we manufacture most of our own stuff, especially under the Furnware brand. So all the products is also manufactured here in New Zealand as well. So, we've got all the front end sales and support staff around selling it, but also the actual manufacturing as well is mainly in-house.
Is this your only use of signNow, or are you also using it internally for yourselves?
Yeah, so we do use it internally, and that's where it kind of came from, as when we were looking at an API and a method to get customers to sign stuff. We kind of went, well, our finance teams in our Siebel brand are already using signNow internally. So that's kind of what kicked it off for us, as going down the route with you guys. So they use it mainly finance for, when they've got to send things to be signed internally, or approvals for things like expenses and stuff like that.
Do you know at all what the situation was before you found signNow at all? Like what kind of itch signNow scratched?
In terms of the what finance are using for, I think it was mainly around that paper-based sort of, and we still do. And actually, so in terms of internal use, signNow is used on the Siebel side of the business, not on the Furnware side, and they're actually looking to start using it now, because we still do a lot of, on the Furnware side, finance will come over to your desk with a few stacks of paper, sign this, goes back, gets scanned. So that still happens quite a bit in the Furnware brand. And that's what was happening at Siebel and why they moved to signNow. When we were looking at the API, we actually said, my colleague was going, we should actually run the numbers here on how many the paper we're going to save from being printed by doing this. So.
What challenges did you, or maybe your customers, keep encountering that made you seek out this API?
What we were finding was, originally we brought in the requirement to sign the quotes, because it was kind of a prompt for customers to go, hey, I actually need to think about what I'm agreeing to. Because we used to get quite a few returns where people would go in for an order, and then they'd go, actually, I didn't realize it was this color, or actually I wanted this height, and we'd have to return and swap it over. So originally we brought in having to sign the quotes as a bit of a prompt to get them to think about it a bit more. But then that kind of just sat there for a few years. And what you really recognize is, especially in this day and age, to send people just a print out from our ERP, it's just a very basic PDF, and expect them to print it out, physically sign it and scan it back. It's just a hassle. And a lot of people also weren't doing it. And we have an internal process where if we don't have a signed final quote, the sales manager has to approve it going to order without the quote being signed. So it was generating a lot of requests for them to approve these. And then especially with COVID as well, people were working from home. They didn't necessarily have access to a printer, or they were away. So we have a peak season peak for us is the start of the school year in New Zealand and Australia is January, which is coming towards the end of summer. So a lot of people are placing orders in late December, January. They've started their summer holidays, teachers, they've gone to the beach for a few weeks. They don't have access to anything. So our busiest time of year was also the time of year we were getting the most quotes back not signed. So really it was a recognition that we need to make it easy for people.
What is describe like a use case for the end user using the signNow API from start to finish? I know you went into it with, the lack of printer, but if you could just sort of, you don't even have to use a real example, but just a generic example. Or real if you have, if there's one that comes to mind.
Yeah. Okay. So from our customers' point of view, what they get is they get an email from our account manager. That email has we have quite a distinct Furnware brand that's got a Furnware branded button in it, which has a link obviously underneath it. All they do is they click on that Furnware branded button, which takes them through to the Sign Now page. And we keep it very simple with how we use it. So we only have 4 fields on these. We have the customer's name, and we actually pre-populate that name from our systems, and that's what we use the API to do. So it already comes pre-populated with their name. We've got a date field, which automatically sets to the day's date that they've opened the form. Then we've got a field where they can enter any sort of notes or a purchase order number, or we used to find they'd sometimes write something in pen on the quote when they signed it, like, please deliver to the front office, or don't deliver at these times. Or so we added a small field for that. And then obviously the main one is the signature field. So we keep it really straightforward in terms of what we ask them for. We pre-populate what we can with the name and the date. And then what will happen is we use the API's redirect function to redirect them to a page on our website once they've finished signing. And that's purely a page that basically says thank you and explains to them some of the next steps.
Cool.
And then that all flows back into our back-end system. And the next time they basically hear from the account manager. So the account manager receives an alert once they sign. And the account manager then can contact them and carry on from there.
So is this back-end system that you speak of, are you talking about something like Salesforce that you have integrated with signNow?
So we kind of integrate with 2 systems. So our ERP system is called Epicor, which handles all our financial, all the quotes are actually generated from there. That's what generates the PDF. And then we use Microsoft Dynamics as our CRM system. So basically what happens is when our team create the quote, we have a support team in our head office that create the quotes. That quote comes out of our Epicor ERP system. And it goes through, we actually use Microsoft Power Automate to do a lot of the integrations between them. So we've got some work that goes on behind the scenes in Power Automate. And what it does is it saves a copy of that PDF into our Dynamics CRM system. And then it sends the requests out to the signNow API. And those are used basically to push the document into signNow. And this is the thing I really like about your API, to be able to create the fields. So that was the real key thing for me when I was developing this solution, is I looked at like Adobe Sign, and they had all this AI to recognize the fields, but I could never get it to recognize our fields. I also looked at, I think it was HelloSign as well, and they didn't have this functionality either. Was the fact I can make an API call and give the exact XY coordinates, the exact content that I want in those fields, and basically I can control it completely through the API. And that was the key thing for me, because that means I can add those fillable fields. And then generate an email to the account manager, which has that link in it for them to send. So we do have another workflow for when somebody signs the quote. So you guys offer that through the Power Automate connector that you've got, that when somebody signs a quote, we can trigger some action. And what we do is we send an alert to the account manager with a copy of the signed quote, and we also place a copy of the signed quote into our CRM system as well from that alert.
When did you implement signNow for the first time?
So I transitioned from my previous role to the IT team probably about 2 months ago now. And I really knew this was a problem from my previous role, so I was quite keen to tackle it quite early when I joined the IT team. So this probably only took me about 3 or 4 weeks to get it sort of from nothing to up and running, because of, and I'd put a lot of that down to your guys' service being really easy to use. So yeah, it's very new. We've only been using it a few days, but we've already had, we've probably had about 50 back already, signed quotes in the last 4 days. So yeah, it's definitely been, and the feedback's been great.
Do you know how much time that saved you? I mean, what would the process have been with?
Pretty huge in terms of, because what it allows us to do by doing this, by also returning that signed final quote into our CRM system, that took out some steps that the sales team used to have to do manually. So, you're probably looking at about 5 to 10 minutes per one quite easily. So, we're already seeing some really good savings. And we tend to do about 4,500 to 5,000 a year. That's kind of just under the Furnware brand. So, it's going to be pretty significant.
You touched on this a little bit, the process of implementing signNow. It's still fresh on your mind because it's, so recent. You said it was fairly smooth getting it up and running. It took only what do you say, a couple of weeks?
Yeah.
Did you have to train people on how to use it? How many people on your team?
See, this is what I like about the API, is nobody really uses signNow. So we're not, internally they do in the finance team, where they actually log into your back end, they upload the documents, they add the fields. But because we're doing it through the API, it's no different for the sales team. They just get they used to get an email with a PDF attached. Now they get an email with a button in it for the customer to click on for them to send on. So they don't need to do anything. The API allows us to automate everything around it. So we actually, for this process, nobody's logging into your back end to do it through that.
Right.
And that's what I really like, because, there were other options we could have gone down, which would have required the sales team to log in or upload a document. And then we're just actually adding time to the process. We're not really saving anything. By using the API to automate it, to them, it's almost no different. But they get the time savings out of it, which was the key thing.
Are there any other results or metrics that, either qualitative or quantitative that you can speak of?
Oh, we're definitely getting, feedback in terms of people liking it. Finding it a lot easier. And just one example, I had one of the sales team phone me yesterday because say this is new, and she'd had a couple of quotes go to a school a few weeks ago and was really struggling to get them to sign them. And so she asked me, because she wasn't sure, she said, "Oh, can we use the new process for these?" So I was like, "Yeah, works fine." So we resent the quotes with a digital signing, and they signed that afternoon. So, she'd been struggling for a couple of weeks.
Oh, that's great.
These pieces of paper, as soon as we sent a link and we made it easy for them, then they could do it in a few seconds, then it came back straight away.
How many people would you say use it a week? Or what would be your estimate for a year internally? And then let's do total users on the outside.
Yeah, so in terms of internally, so we've got about 28 account managers. So whilst they won't log into the back end, they'll be the ones that are, sending it out to customers and seeing the use impacting on them, as well as it also impacts about 8 support staff in the office, in terms of, again, not directly using it, but getting that documentation automatically back. And then, we'd anticipate around 4,500 to 5,000 end customer transactions in total. Some of those will be the same customer ordering again. But that's what we'd probably expect to see in a year. That's kind of what we're forecasting.
Cool. And so there's another, month or so until your most busy part of the year?
Yeah, so we're kind of in the busiest sales season is kind of started now, really.
Kind of started now, yeah, that makes sense.
Export stuff to Australia, so we're kind of in it right now, and it'll last for the next sort of 8 to 10 weeks. And that's why it was quite key for us to get something up quickly as well, because we're seeing the benefit from it now. If this had taken 3 or 4 months to implement, we'd be back into our quiet, and we'd have lost another peak season where we wouldn't have seen the benefit from it. So.
Right.